This episode is brought to you by Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. Hosted by Katie Milkman, an award-winning behavioral scientist and author of the best-selling book, How to Change, Choiceology is a show about the psychology and economics behind our decisions. Hear true stories from Nobel laureates, authors, athletes, and everyday people about why we do the things we do. Listen to Choiceology at schwab.com/podcast or wherever you listen.
It's that time of year when I literally have nothing to wear. 30% off all Abercrombie dresses came at the perfect time. When I hear the words all dresses, I know I need to fill my cart. And the A&F Mila dress is at the top of my list. Use code SPOTIFYAF at checkout for an extra 15% off almost everything through April 14th, 2025 in stores and online in US and Canada. Exclusions apply. See details online. 30% off all dresses is valid in stores and online through April 14th, 2025 in US and Canada. Excludes clearance, online price, or flex discount.
Hey folks, it's Courtney Martin from Slate's How To podcast. In our series, Living at Odds, we're talking with people who are living in our increasingly fragmented country and trying to make it work. In our first episode, we heard from a Democrat and a Republican who first met selling caps, t-shirts, and other candidate merch during the 2024 presidential campaign. Forced to share a street corner, they actually got along pretty well. Then came Election Day and the inauguration, and well, they're not sure how to move forward or really even talk to one another. For today's episode, I'm turning it over to a former host of How To, Amanda Ripley. She joins us with a story about a rivalry inside the public school district in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Take it away, Amanda.
If Stacey Woolley were a superhero, her tagline would probably be, Stacey Woolley, involved parent.
So I have basically two sets of kids. I have two older kids and then three younger kids. And when my third child entered into kindergarten, we got a phone call before school started and were asked if we would host an exchange teacher from Spain. And then when we got to the end of that school year, probably in March or so, I got a phone call one Sunday and got asked if I would consider a nomination for becoming the PTA president-elect. And I said, I don't know. I have a lot going on. I'm not sure if I can do that. And the mom said to me, well, it's Sunday. You pray about it and I'll call you back right after church. And
no pressure.
No pressure. She was not letting me off the hook.
Truth be told, it wasn't that hard to convince Stacey to step up from PTA member to president. Growing up, Stacey'd always loved everything about school.
I enjoyed being in class. I enjoyed socializing. I was almost always that teacher's pet that everybody probably actually hated, except in fourth grade. It was obviously a big deal to me that my teacher did not love me because I remember that very clearly. Her name was Mrs. Honeycutt, and we all called her Mrs. Funnybutt, if that tells you anything.
Stacey seriously considered teaching before becoming a speech pathologist working in schools. So she's never been too far from the classroom. Oh, and the other reason she accepted the challenge to lead the PTA? Stacey doesn't like whiners.
There are two types of people, is what I believe. There are people who complain about things, and there are people who do things to make things better. I was asked to do something, and why not?
So Stacey became PTA president, and when the parents started to worry about their new principal, Stacey felt like she had to do something.
We got a new principal at the beginning of August that next year when I was becoming the PTA president. And that is when we started having some concerns. We didn't feel like she was prepared.
The old principal at Stacey's elementary school was beloved, meaning the new principal had high expectations to meet. And when the new principal didn't communicate as actively as some of the highly involved parents wanted, they decided to be proactive.
So we, in all of our parental knowledge about how everything should work.
Right, you knew everything.
Yeah, we knew everything. It's just a little system, fix our school. Come on. We reached out to leadership within the district, and why start with her direct supervisor? We went, straight to the top.
So the PTA scheduled a meeting with the superintendent of Tulsa Public Schools, the person in charge of one of the largest districts in Oklahoma. To give you context, the superintendent oversaw more than 36,000 students across 80 schools and a multi-million-dollar budget in 2019. That's who Stacey was about to lock horns with. Okay, so you and some other parents come to the superintendent's office to, well, what was your goal?
To get a new principal.
And how did that go?
We were told, sorry, we feel like she is the person for the job. You haven't even given her a year to learn the ropes of this school building, and, we're going to support her.
At that point, for Stacey, the fight was no longer about their elementary school principal. It was about the superintendent's whole attitude.
She just shut it down. Like, thank you for bringing that to our attention. We believe she's doing a great job. See you later. I felt like she did not listen and she was dismissive. I was just incredibly frustrated and annoyed.
Was it then that you decided to run for the school board?
It was. It sure was.
Fueled by her anger, Stacey ran for the Tulsa school board in 2019 and won, meaning she finally had the power to make the superintendent listen.
I was going to make sure that parents were heard. She obviously wasn't listening, and parents needed to have a voice at the table.
If you hear a note of righteousness here in Stacey's voice, you're noticing something important. Fights about education and kids touch on our deepest values and fears. Disagreements can feel like holy wars. Just think back to the early days of the COVID pandemic. There was all that anxiety and fear and stress that had nowhere good to go. So that bristling energy found an outlet at school board meetings, which imploded in conflicts over closures, remote learning, and masking mandates.
In school board meetings across the country, parents have been angry.
I vote to vote them out today.
They've been yelling.
And we should take our kids and we should pull them out of school.
A scuffle broke out during a Twin Cities school board meeting over a new mask mandate.
Guys, come on. Hey, officers, please come to the room.
We know by now that education is ground zero for every new ideological conflict in America. From as far back as segregation to the more recent bans on books, critical race theory, and transgender athletes from school sports. The story I'm going to tell you today from Tulsa, Oklahoma, is not as extreme as many of these fights, but the tale of Stacey's relationship with this superintendent offers us a little glimmer of hope for how more of us might get out of the conflict traps we keep falling into. Hello and welcome to Living at Odds. I'm Amanda Ripley. We've all witnessed a lot of relationships severing over the past decade, and the level of conflict we're experiencing in our society is unlikely to go away anytime soon. Bottom line, we're kind of stuck with each other as neighbors, community members, family. So what now? The second episode of our series presents a bit of a mystery. How did two arch enemies somehow turn their relationship around when so many other people in the exact same situation never do? Chipping away at this mystery is really important because in this story, like so many others, what's really at stake isn't just funding for schools or power. It's the students themselves. It's our kids.
This episode is brought to you by Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. Choiceology is a show all about the psychology and economics behind our decisions. Each episode shares the latest research in behavioral science and dives into themes like, can we learn to make smarter decisions, and the power of do-overs. The show is hosted by Katie Milkman. She's an award-winning behavioral scientist, professor at the Wharton School, and author of the best-selling book, How to Change. In each episode, Katie talks to authors, historians, athletes, Nobel laureates, and everyday people about why we make irrational choices and how we can make better ones to avoid costly mistakes. Listen and subscribe at schwab.com/podcast or find it wherever you listen. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Longtime How To listeners may remember me as the host of this very show, a job that I loved. But before that, and way before I wrote a book about high conflict, I covered education. And let me tell you, schools have been embroiled in high-stakes polarization way before polarization became a normal part of American life. At the beginning of the show, Stacey described the school superintendent as someone who just didn't listen, who shut down the parents. You might have imagined an old-school bureaucrat who just reflexively defended the status quo. But that's not quite right.
I never intended to leave the classroom. Young little Debbie Gist, who wanted to be a preschool teacher, I didn't say I want to be a preschool teacher and then someday I want to be, a commissioner of education or a superintendent.
Meet Dr. Deborah Gist. She's from Tulsa, but her career has taken her all over. She's an award-winning teacher who worked in Texas and Florida and then became the first state superintendent of education for Washington, D.C. And that's where I first interviewed her, circa 2007. I was covering education at Time magazine, and I was so impressed with her laser-like focus on what was best for students that I later wrote about her for Time's 100 Most Influential People list. And I watched her from afar as she dealt with a lot of change and controversy. It's fair to say that anytime someone tries to reform education, they're going to be met with serious pushback. And that's due in part to the nature of teaching.
Educators are very relational people. They have to be. That is a huge part of what they do. And so when you're in a role working with educators, you have to start with relationship and you have to pay attention to emotions and needs and trust.
During her time outside of Tulsa, Deb gained a reputation for making big changes, which sometimes upset teachers and their unions. So when the opportunity came to return home to Tulsa and become the city's superintendent, Deb was optimistic.
I came home to my hometown to be superintendent. And when I got here, it was a place where things were built on trust and respect. And I had a lot of relationships because there were people all across the community who had known me since I was a child. And the board was strong and we were all moving forward together. And I didn't just believe, but I knew deep in my soul that was exactly what I was supposed to be doing.
But there were conflicts, of course, too. Specifically, a controversy over a high school principal, the year before Stacey Woolley had that meeting with Deb. Many parents were unhappy, teachers were upset there, students staged a walkout. The principal fell on her sword and got reassigned, and this all happened early enough in Deb's tenure that it kind of threatened to set a precedent. So later that year, when Stacey and the PTA came demanding that Deb get rid of their principal too, Deb was not having it.
Stacey came in with some other members of the leadership of that school. And they were like, okay, well, we know what we need to do. We just need to raise a giant stink about this.
Basically, this is a posse coming to your office and wanting someone's head on a stake, right? You know what this looks like.
I'm being very diplomatic. So thank you for being much more straightforward about the situation. Yes, that is what was happening. I was pretty frustrated because I thought, we're not doing this. This is not going to happen.
How might you have remembered or described Stacey specifically?
She's definitely was a leader of the group. I don't know how I would describe her, except to say that she was, strident is probably one word I would use.
Little did Deb know that Stacey would soon become a more permanent fixture in her life, because this standoff with Deb galvanized Stacey.
I just so happened to be in a district that was going to be up for election in the next year. And people started asking, hey, have you considered running for school board? And, of course, duty called. So, of course I was.
What was your reaction when you heard she was running for school board?
Oh, shit. I was like, oh, dear. Here we go. My sense was that she was running because she was unhappy with me and wanted to be in a position where she could have the ability to do something about that.
Stacey won that election and began her term as a Tulsa school board member in 2019.
I would just like to say thank you to all my supporters and most of all my family who were willing to make the sacrifices needed for both mom and wife, first to campaign and now to serve the community. I know that I'll never be perfect, but I can promise these things. I will listen to all of my stakeholders, all of our stakeholders. I will carefully and prayerfully consider all decisions and their possible positive and negative outcomes, and I will be transparent.
One of Stacey's first tasks in her new job was to do a performance evaluation for the superintendent that she'd clashed with. Here's Deb.
We met at this coffee shop to go over how did you do on this section and that section. And she basically scored me the very lowest score on everything. My reaction to that was like, really? I'm terrible at everything. It didn't feel like a genuine analysis. It felt more like I'm going to show you what I think about you. When you think about it, it was probably one of the worst possible ways we could have spent one of our first times together because, my evaluation is public. It's a pretty high stakes kind of a situation for me as a leader. There are only 7 members of the board. So if one person gives you all ones, then it pulls it down. So I'm already kind of feeling frustrated about it. But then you add on this layer of this is going to affect me more broadly than that. It gets kind of loaded. And she defended what she had marked. And we were both being really careful. So it was not, contentious. It was just tense.
How much hope did you have for the relationship with her at that point?
I didn't see any hope or way of getting out of it.
Stacey didn't see much hope either.
I actually remember having a conversation with my husband after that in which I said, she's going to have to go. This isn't going to get better. She's not going to hear me.
By this point in the story, you might be feeling like Stacey's being a little unreasonable. But let's remember what it felt like to be Stacey, or any parent who doesn't feel like they're being heard.
I really was of the mindset that she just had to listen to people.
Yeah, sure. I wonder, for our listeners who don't have kids or haven't been in a situation like this, for me, there was a special kind of fire in my belly that I would get when I felt like my kid's school was in trouble.
Oh, absolutely.
It's hard to even articulate, I feel like, but it's like a mama bear situation. You're going to find a way. This is super important for those listeners who don't understand when they see, parents at school board meetings so passionate and upset. What was going on there for you?
Yeah, I think that we get in our lizard brains real quick when it comes to what feels like something that could hurt our children.
Yeah.
It's really pretty intriguing. I think that if people haven't experienced that, it's almost impossible to understand because it really can be something that throws a parent off kilter.
As the saying goes, having a child is like your heart walking around outside your body. And it is so true. When you take a 4 or 5-year-old kid to school for the first time and you watch them walk away from you with a giant backpack on their back, they look so small. You're trusting this institution, this school, with your heart. hoping and praying that they're doing the right thing. And if something happens to make you lose that trust, oh my gosh, that is terrifying.
I can't begin to portray how important I think public schools are. And so that is very much, part of who I am. So the idea that someone might not be giving public school students what they need was definitely something that would get me, fired up. And I would say the good part about that period of time when I first came on the board was that I knew nothing. If I was going to actually do anything that would be helpful for the 35,000 students who attend Tulsa Public Schools, I felt like I better figure out what my job was or is. And I wanted to do the job well, not just be there to be difficult.
In this moment right here, this might be where Stacey and Deb's relationship starts to shift. Until this point, Stacey seemed like she was on a mission to destroy Deb. But now it seemed like they might actually have some things in common.
One of the things that I really appreciated and learned about Stacey very quickly is that she was doing the work. These agendas that the board members get are, 60 pages, and this is a $700 million budget. I understand when not everybody can get in the weeds. It's reasonable. They're volunteers. But she did. She read everything. She gave smart and productive and critical feedback on things, and I really appreciated that.
Respecting your enemy is a step in the right direction. But there were a few other strategic things that Stacey and Deb did that helped foster their relationship. For example, they gave each other small wins, like when Stacey asked Deb for training on how to be an effective school board member, and Deb delivered. Stacey made herself a little bit vulnerable by asking for help, and then Deb saw an opening to actually follow through and build trust. They also just kept talking, and like so many people who think they have nothing in common, they found one thing that they both loved.
I have too many rescue animals. I have 4 dogs now.
Whoa.
And Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga, by the way, is Deb's cat. Stacey, what's the latest?
All the animals are doing well. The 2 dogs, the cat, the rabbit, all the fish, and a bearded dragon. And of course, the source of food for the bearded dragon, the roaches that we raise.
What's that, you say? Yes, roaches. Oddly enough, Deb has raised insects too. I guess it just goes to show you how being curious can reveal small connections, which makes talking easier, which in turn makes working together in conflict much easier. Then, about a year into Stacey's term on the board, something happened that could have become Deb's worst nightmare. Stacey was elected president of the school board.
I sent her flowers and said congratulations on being elected president.
Is that something you do every time someone gets elected president?
No. I wasn't trying to buy favor or anything. I knew her better than that. She's not someone who...
She's not going to be flowers, fine.
Flowers. No. I already knew her better than that by then. But I think I was trying to send a message that I was ready to do this together.
So, flowers. People send them all the time, right? At life's milestones. But this felt a little different and marked a change, including for the recipient, Stacey. Do you remember what you thought when you got the flowers?
I was definitely surprised, but I also felt like she was really smart, whether it's extending an olive branch or just her administrative assistant who always sends somebody flowers after they become the board president. And I wasn't, convinced about which was correct, but it made me think.
Their bond was slowly strengthening, but neither of them could have imagined what was going to happen next. When we come back, we'll bring Stacey and Deb together in conversation to hash out what happened. That's after the break.
You probably know that hiring is hard, but it shouldn't be a hassle or a drain on your budget. That's why I actually turned myself to Upwork, which is a one-stop shop to find, hire, and pay top freelance talent, saving you time and keeping costs in check. Companies at every stage turn to Upwork to get things done and find more flexibility in the way they staff key projects and initiatives. Upwork's global marketplace is filled with top talent in IT, web development, AI, design, admin support, marketing, and more. And posting a job on Upwork is really easy. With no cost to join, you can register, browse freelance profiles, get help drafting a job post, or even book a consultation. And from there, you can connect with freelancers and easily hire them. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to post your job for free and connect with top talent ready to help your business grow. That's UPWORK.com. Upwork.com.
If you've listened to the How To podcast for a while, then you know how important acceptance is when it comes to personal growth. And do you know who else is big on acceptance? Discover. You see, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. That's a whole lot of places and a whole lot of acceptance, which is great for Discover, but even better for you. Based on the 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/credit card.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states and situations.
This is Living at Odds. I'm Amanda Ripley. Okay, I gotta say here, even though Superintendent Deb Gist and School Board President Stacey Woolley were learning to work together, that doesn't mean everything was perfect. For example, Stacey voted to delay the renewal of Deb's contract as school superintendent so that incoming board members would be able to have a say. Not malicious exactly, but for Deb, it still smarted. Meanwhile, two other unexpected challenges arose. One of them was COVID. The pandemic hit 1 year into Stacey's term. The board and the administration were tasked with a near impossible mission of protecting students and staff, all while moving school online. Their tentative bond was sorely tested by the uncertainty of COVID, by the challenges of their respective leadership roles, and by other parents in ways that were sometimes wildly new and other times strangely familiar. I remember, Stacey, in our last interview, you said that your first interaction with Deb, which was somewhat adversarial, with the other parents about a principal, and you left feeling unheard, which is so often how people feel when they're dealing with their children's school or the bureaucracy. And now, of course, you understand her response and her motivations a lot better. You understand her values and who she is as a leader. But I'm wondering, how do you now, Stacey, being the one that parents are coming to sometimes with their impossible problems that you aren't in a position to fix, how do you try to make them feel heard? Or do you?
I think I try. I'm certain I'm not always successful. And I will say that during COVID, I experienced a lot of different reactions to the things that, we were doing as a school board, things that were happening throughout society. And there were many times when I interacted with parents who I felt like were also willing to hear me. So it's a two-way street, right? So when someone would come to me and express frustration over, why aren't we back in school? We have to be back in school. And then I would share, this conversation that Dr. Gist had with an older grandparent who happened to be raising multiple grandchildren. She says to Dr. Gist, thank you so much for not sending my kids back to school because I'm it for them. And if something happens to me, what happens to them? And so being able to have this conversation with people who have never had a perspective like that, and those people willing to hear me tell that story and try to empathize and relate to it, totally changed how they felt about being out of school. Or, maybe they still felt like, God, we just got to get back to school, but they could see it in a different light. So it is a two-way willingness to hear each other. So when I walked away from that meeting with Dr. Gist and I felt as though, we were completely unheard, well, maybe I wasn't listening either.
Yeah, it's so often a game of who's going to listen first, right?
And there's a lesson for me about how do you, even in instances where you're not able to solve the problem with the solution that someone believes is the way to go, to make sure that you're empathizing and make sure that they feel heard in the best way that you possibly can.
It's crucial to make people feel heard, but it's really hard to do when the person on the other side of the table feels threatened, like during COVID.
I mean, it was so busy and incredibly frustrating and always felt life or death.
Do you remember any moments of lightness or even humor in the midst of all this strain and uncertainty?
I mean, I don't remember much humor during that time at all.
No, I don't remember much humor either, although it was ironic that one night we were up, gosh, I don't know how late our latest board meeting went. It was well after midnight. And the irony that night was that I had just tested positive for COVID while we were voting on whether or not kids needed to go back to school during COVID. And I could see online teachers having a discussion about kind of like the audacity that we were discussing it, knowing that I'm sick. And then some parents who were not fans saying, see, she's not even careful, or she wouldn't have COVID right now. And she's trying to keep our kids out of school while she's obviously out running around doing whatever she wants. We actually never were leaving my house because my husband is a doctor and I knew he could bring home COVID at any time. I obviously wasn't out going to bars, but everybody just decides how to fill in the story. And I think that's actually where things become dangerous for all of us and increases the likelihood that we won't find common ground is when we apply our own stories to things we observe without actually knowing the true story.
And that's such an important point because it's one of the things that tends to happen in relationships and in groups, that we make assumptions because as human beings, we are meaning-making people. We want to understand the why and the how. And so if we don't have the information, we create the story ourselves, and then we believe what we told ourselves about the story, even if it may just be a conclusion that we drew just by connecting dots that may have not even be connected.
This bears repeating. In our current age of runaway conflict, we need to over-communicate. Be transparent. Reveal why you're doing what you're doing. Show your work.
You can't chase down everything that someone is saying or whatnot. But when you see that something is getting traction and is out there, especially as a public official, you don't even have to acknowledge it, but I think just making sure that the facts are out there and that they are over-communicated.
And I know people will listen to this and be thinking, well, that's great. But what about when someone doesn't have that pure motivation, when they're acting in bad faith, or they're not doing the work and they're not doing the reading and they're, and that may be a whole other podcast because I know we're talking about you two right now. But I wonder if you think there's anything here for those folks.
Almost everyone at their core wants progress for other human beings. I mean, there are definitely exceptions, but I think we can't make assumptions, and that if we give people the benefit of the doubt, if we assume that they want what we want and just keep trying, and then at some point with some folks, you do have to give yourself some perspective or you might lose your mind. But I think that not giving up on people is a really important component of this.
My sense is that there are, like you said, some percentage of people who really just want to destroy things. But that percentage is smaller than it feels like it is, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. That especially most people in education want good things for kids, even though we disagree wildly about how to get there and what good things are and how to define that and which kids and blah, blah, blah. Would you agree with that, Stacey?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, even for the people who sometimes it doesn't feel as though they are putting kids first, that seen through a different lens, we can oftentimes find where they actually are. And so it's imperative that we at least try to find our why that we have in common. And if we can't find the why that we have in common, I think that's when it gets really, really, really hard.
This is so important to keep in mind. Even people who you and I might think don't have the interests of society at heart, they think they do. Everyone thinks they're good. Earlier, I mentioned that there were two big challenges that Deb and Stacey were facing. The first was COVID. The second was some increasing friction between the Tulsa School District and Oklahoma state officials. It began in 2021, and it involved a dust-up over a prayer said at a commencement event, and also limitations on discussions of racial bias in school, allegations of financial mismanagement, and more. It's a very complex story. But one thing that came out of all of this was that in 2023, the state threatened to pull the Tulsa district's accreditation, a nuclear option with potentially dire consequences for students, teachers, and for Deb's future.
One option was you stay and you fight, and a lot of people wanted that, and I did for a while. But you have to determine whether the fight is worth it and whether or not it is what is best ultimately for what you care about the most.
Deb ultimately resigned in August 2023. And guess who was deeply upset about this? Stacey, the woman who had run for school board because she was frustrated by Deb. Before the official vote accepting Deb's departure, Stacey got emotional. She said, "This is not what I wish for. This is not what I've heard from our community." It was quite a turnaround in the span of a few years to go from wanting to oust Deb herself to defending her.
I mean, upset to the point where I was, I felt like it was an attack on democracy, right? Which also then put Dr. Gist in the situation where she stepped down, which was not what I would say the city of Tulsa wanted. Big-time stakeholders in Tulsa Public Schools were very frustrated that that's what ended up happening.
Yeah, I can still hear the sadness and a little bit of frustration in both of your voices. I know there's much more that you could say about this, but I want to return before we say goodbye to the smaller story of your relationship. Reading the clips, Stacey, I was struck by how strenuously you fought for Deb and how truly upset you were. What do we take from that?
Oh, gosh. I don't know that I'm eloquent enough to provide an answer that is fitting, but I will say that what I think of when I think of our relationship is that we did not come from the same place. We were not on the same page. We had to work together after I got on the school board. Dr. Gist was always very dignified, and I think that her willingness to always be professional in the face of conflict in our one-on-one meetings when she knew that I didn't care for her, all of those things, they just happened to come together in a perfect way to help us to recognize we have more in common than we have differences. And that in spite of any differences we have as human beings, if we are willing to put the work that we believe in ahead of anything else, then I really do think that we will end up with relationships that are worth fighting for.
I want to underscore the not giving up on people, because when you reflect back and then fast forward over the course of those years to the extent of how bad our relationship was, that Stacey really, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, Stacey, but like actually ran and wanted to do this job because she did not think that I was doing mine or that I should be in my role. And I knew that and felt, kind of equally unhappy about the situation, and that went on for more than a year, that we didn't give up on each other. And that ended up resulting in two people who then are linking arms and doing really important work and doing it well together. So if you find yourself, and when I find myself in the future in a conflict, that's the reminder that I'm going to give myself, is that you cannot give up on people and things can turn around.
We hear a lot in the news these days about people turning on one another, treating their neighbors as their enemies. We hear far less about people who keep trying and trying to work it out. Which is funny because that happens too, all the time, right? We all know people who have stuck it out against all odds and found a way to understand each other and get things done. But it is really good to be reminded what that looks like. So thank you to Deb and to Stacey for reliving what happened in Tulsa and for reminding us all to talk about our pets and, whenever possible, send flowers. And by the way, for any parents or educators who are listening and want more ways to coexist against all odds in a difficult time, we've got a bunch of free resources and conflict hacks we've designed for you and with you over at thegoodconflict.com. We'll put a link in the show notes. Next time on Living at Odds, you probably learned in school about Plessy versus Ferguson, the infamous Supreme Court decision that affirmed segregation as separate but equal. Join Courtney Martin for a conversation with descendants of that Plessy and that Ferguson about being in conflict with your ancestors and coming to terms with your family history. This episode was produced by Rosie, Belson, and Maura Currie. Merritt Jacob mixed this episode and composed original music. Our supervising producer is Joel Meyer. We had help with this episode from Sophie Summergrad. Thank you to Slate's Hillary Fry, Katie Rayford, Caitlin Schneider, Alexander Cole, and to Ivy Lee Simones, who created our artwork. Thanks also to Derek John for his help with this series. How To was created by Charles Duhigg. Special thanks to the Hearthland Foundation, which provided funding for this series. We want to hear what you think of this series. Have you been able to overcome a conflict with a colleague or coworker? What did you do? What's your relationship like now? Email us at howto@slate.com. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode. I'm Amanda Ripley.